What happens when a group of television hosts starts talking about leaving the United States simply because an election doesn't go their way? That is now at the center of a growing controversy surrounding The View, with Sunny Hostin, Whoopi Goldberg, and Joy Behar facing renewed backlash over comments about the upcoming 2026 midterm elections. And if the statements being circulated are accurate, this isn't just another political argument on daytime television. The hosts are allegedly talking about leaving the country after voting if Republicans win, and they're explaining exactly why they believe they wouldn't want to stay, and watch what happens next. But here's the bigger question. Is this actually a serious plan, or is it simply another political statement designed to get attention? Because we've seen celebrities make similar promises before, and some of them eventually came back. Now let's get into this. The political temperature surrounding The View appears to be getting even hotter as the 2026 midterm elections approach. The show has spent years becoming one of the most politically outspoken programs on television, and its hosts frequently use the platform to discuss elections, presidents, political parties, social issues, and controversies happening across the country. But now, according to the claims being discussed online, Sunny Hostin, Whoopi Goldberg, and Joy Behar have taken that conversation another step further. The controversy centers around comments suggesting that some of the hosts may leave the United States for a period of time following the midterm elections if Republicans perform strongly. That immediately created a huge reaction, because we're not talking about simply disagreeing with an election result, we're talking about publicly discussing leaving the country because of it. And that distinction is exactly why this story has generated so much attention. According to the comments circulating from the discussion, Sunny Hostin allegedly said that after casting her vote in the midterms, she would want to get out of the country if Republicans won. The reasoning presented was that another Republican victory would create what she views as an extremely difficult political environment, particularly after the 2024 presidential election. She reportedly referenced destinations including Italy and Puerto Rico as possible places to spend time away from the political atmosphere in the United States. And the argument didn't stop there. The comments reportedly framed another Republican victory as something emotionally overwhelming and suggested that the aftermath could become extremely chaotic. That's obviously a very strong reaction to an election. But then came Whoopi Goldberg's reported response. According to the version of the comments being circulated, Whoopi expressed a similar desire to leave the country if the political situation moved in a direction she strongly opposed. Jamaica was reportedly mentioned as one possible destination, and the explanation went beyond simply saying, "I don't like the Republican Party." The comments reportedly described the current Republican leadership as authoritarian and accused Republicans of suppressing media, truth, and freedom of speech. That is where the controversy becomes much bigger than simply three television personalities discussing their vacation plans. Because once political commentators begin telling millions of viewers that an opposing political party represents authoritarianism and the destruction of basic freedoms, the conversation naturally becomes much more heated. And that is exactly what critics are pushing back against. The biggest criticism isn't necessarily that these hosts have strong political opinions. They're allowed to have them. They're allowed to vote for whoever they want. They're allowed to criticize Republicans, Democrats, Donald Trump, Joe Biden, or anyone else in politics. The question is whether repeatedly portraying millions of Americans who disagree with them as ignorant, dangerous, or incapable of understanding politics actually helps their argument. That has become a major criticism of The View over the years, and the latest controversy has brought that criticism back to the surface. Whoopi has previously made extremely harsh statements about people who support Republicans or Donald Trump, and the same pattern has appeared across political discussions on the show. Critics argue that this kind of rhetoric doesn't just alienate Republicans. It can also push away independents, moderate Democrats, and people who simply don't want politics dominating every part of their lives. And that's an important distinction. Not everyone watching television is deeply invested in political parties. Some people simply want entertainment. Some people disagree with Republicans on certain issues while agreeing with them on others. Others may support one specific policy without identifying themselves with an entire political movement. But when the conversation becomes essentially, if you support the other side, you're stupid or uneducated, that leaves very little room for a meaningful political discussion. And that's one reason these comments continue generating backlash. There is also another reason people are skeptical whenever celebrities announce plans to leave the United States over politics. We've seen this before. One of the most obvious examples frequently brought up in these discussions is Rosie O'Donnell, who relocated to Ireland after the 2024 election and later returned to the United States. Her situation is a reminder that making a dramatic announcement immediately after an election and actually permanently leaving the country are two very different things. People can change their minds. Circumstances can change, and sometimes what sounds like a permanent political decision turns into a temporary escape from an environment someone finds frustrating. So when celebrities say they're going to leave if a particular candidate or party wins, the public naturally wants to know whether they genuinely mean it. Or is it simply political theater? That's the question hanging over these latest comments. But there's another issue here that could ultimately matter more than the controversy itself. It's the impact this kind of political messaging could have on the View's audience. The show has always been political. That's nothing new. But there's a difference between discussing politics and repeatedly turning every major political event into a battle between good and evil. When viewers constantly hear that one side is dangerous, ignorant, authoritarian, or fundamentally destroying the country, eventually some people simply stop listening. And that isn't necessarily because they've suddenly become supporters of the opposing party. They may just be exhausted. That's the audience the View has to worry about, because television ratings aren't determined only by Republicans. They're determined by everybody. Independents matter. Moderate Democrats matter. People who don't follow politics closely matter. And people who simply want to break from political arguments matter too. So if the show continues doubling down on increasingly aggressive political commentary throughout the summer and into the fall, the big question is whether that strategy will actually bring more viewers in or push more viewers away. Now, the next few months could become especially interesting. If the reports about celebrities and the View personalities participating in political rallies and protests continue, we're potentially looking at a much larger entertainment versus politics story leading into November. We've already seen celebrities become heavily involved in political campaigns during previous election cycles. Some of them became major political voices, others eventually stepped away. And some discovered that celebrity influence doesn't automatically translate into votes. That's the lesson that makes the 2026 midterms particularly interesting, because the public isn't the same audience it was several years ago. People have become much more skeptical of celebrity endorsements. They question motivations, they question media narratives, and they increasingly want to see actual policies rather than famous people telling them which political side they're supposed to support. That's why the months leading into November could become a real test for The View and the celebrities who decide to get involved. Will these rallies generate enthusiasm? Will they increase engagement? Will they actually influence voters? Or will audiences simply become even more tired of seeing celebrities enter political battles? Nobody knows yet, but we're about to find out. And this brings us to perhaps the most interesting part of the entire situation. If these political appearances and increasingly aggressive election discussions continue throughout August, what happens when The View enters the September television season? Could the show benefit from the extra attention? Absolutely. Controversy can generate clicks. Controversy can generate headlines. And controversy can temporarily bring people back to a program they haven't watched in months. But there's another side to that equation. If the audience becomes exhausted with the constant political messaging, those same headlines could end up hurting the show. And that's why September could be particularly revealing. The real question isn't whether The View can generate controversy. It clearly can. The question is whether that controversy can actually translate into sustainable ratings. Because there is a huge difference between becoming viral on social media and convincing viewers to sit down and watch an entire television program every day. And with the 2026 midterms getting closer, we're going to see more political content, more celebrity involvement, and almost certainly more arguments surrounding all of it. So whether Sunny Hostin, Whoopi Goldberg, and Joy Behar actually follow through on the idea of leaving the United States after the election remains to be seen. Maybe they will, maybe they won't. And perhaps the entire conversation will eventually become another forgotten celebrity prediction. But if they really do leave after casting their votes, you can be certain people will remember these comments. Because at that point, the question won't simply be whether they disagreed with the election result. It will be whether they were actually willing to follow through on everything they said beforehand. And that's something we'll have to wait until November to find out. So now I want to hear from you. Do you think these comments are serious, or is this simply political rhetoric designed to generate attention? And do you think The View's increasingly political approach will help its ratings heading into the fall or make the situation even worse? Let me know what you think down in the comments.